Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
In new developments in Iraq, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi's group released a statement on the internet claiming responsibility for today's suicide car bomb attack on the office of the Supreme Council of Islamic Revolution in central Baghdad. The statement was signed by the Jihad in Iraq group. However, it is difficult to verify the information that a suicide bombing occurred in the Jabariya neighborhood in Baghdad.
Armed attacks in Iraq by unknown groups are being waged under the banner of resisting the American occupation. The attacks have been on the rise in the days preceding the parliamentary election. The office of the Supreme Council of Islamic Revolution was attacked by gunmen today. A spokesman pinned the responsibility for this morning's car bomb attack to what he referred to as a shadowy terrorist group that is a remnant of the former Saddam Hussein regime.
The information we have is that there was a second booby-trapped car. He is a Syrian citizen, does not speak with an Iraqi accent, and he is from Al-Qaeda.
This assault on the Islamic Party, led by Abdulaziz al-Hakim, is the most recent attack against Shiites. Al-Hakim is the candidate named on the United Shiite list, and most likely he will win in this election. The explosion killed at least 3 people and wounded a number of others. The office itself was greatly damaged, in addition to damages to neighboring buildings. The police and Iraqi and U.S. Army forces imposed a security belt around the area, preventing residents from reaching the explosion site. Muqtada al-Sadr supporters organized a peaceful demonstration in front of the Iraqi Ministry of Oil in downtown Baghdad, protesting the sharp decline in fuel and electricity services. Abdelhadi Darraji, an aide to al-Sadr, joined the protest and asked his supporters not to believe rumors that religious scholar Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani had blessed the United Shiite Coalition, which is running in this election. In addition to targeting Shiites in Iraq, gunmen continue to wage suicide attacks and ambushing the Iraqi security forces, who are supposed to provide security during the election. Meanwhile, they are unable to protect themselves. Without a doubt, the security lapse in Iraq threatens the political process. At the very least, candidates are unable to campaign in public. Moreover, they're not posting signs of themselves, and campaigning for the election is pretty much non-existent.
From January 17th, the registration of Iraqi voters abroad for the elections began and will continue until January 23rd. During this time, they will need to prove that they are Iraqis by providing an Iraqi identity card, local identity cards, or a passport. However, this invitation does not include Israeli Jews who are originally Iraqi, since the Electoral Commission did not acknowledge their right to participate in the elections.
Bibi Nassim is an Israeli of Iraqi origin. He remembers everything about his birthplace, Basra. His situation is similar to most Israelis who are originally Iraqi, living in the Iraqi neighborhood in Jerusalem. They have the same customs and traditions as the Iraqi people, but today, they don't know anything about Iraq, their people, or its politics. Most of them are not even paying attention to whether or not they have permission to vote in the upcoming Iraqi elections.
I will go there for a visit. There is no city in the world like Basra. I remember everything about Iraq, the streets, the stores, everything.
The memories of Iraq by Iraqis with Israeli citizenship are not enough for them to participate in the upcoming Iraqi elections. According to the Independent Electoral Commission, these Iraqi Israelis are prohibited from participating because they currently carry a passport from a country that has no relations with Iraq, and they do not recognize these documents. This position contradicts the views of the out-of-country program for elections in Iraq, which believes in the right of Israelis of Iraqi origin to vote in the elections based on the interim Iraqi state administration law, which allows anyone who has acquired an Iraqi nationality to participate in the elections. Two contradictory views. The first welcomes any Jew who is originally Iraqi to the voting office, as long as he does not have an Israeli nationality. The second view calls on Israelis to participate in the elections, as long as they present two documents, either from Israel or from a state agency that confirms their identity, age, and nationality, as long as the voter has an Iraqi father and was born before the end of December 1986. Both sides are facing the lack of desire by Iraqi Jews to vote for anyone.
I want to visit Iraq, but I am not paying attention to the elections. It's not necessary for me to vote. I don't know anything about Iraq.
Because I don't know nothing from Iraq.
Do you want to go back to visit?
Maybe to Slimania. I want to see where my home.
This lack of desire may be shared by 240,000 Israelis of Iraqi origin. Among them, 29% were born in Iraq, and 71% of the others were born in the Jewish state. Most of the 150,000 Iraqi Jews who left Iraq left between the years 1948 and 1951. Out of the 32 Jews who were in Iraq before the U.S. forces entered the country, only 13 people remain. The former interim Iraqi Governing Council could not resolve the negotiations aimed at bringing tens of thousands of Iraqi Jews who carry the passport of a country that was considered enemy number one to the Iraqis.
The Iraqi Catholic Archbishop of Mosul has been freed a day after being kidnapped at gunpoint. He said no ransom had been paid. Archbishop Basil George Kasmousa said he hoped his ordeal would not be seen as an attack on the church. The Vatican, which had condemned the abduction as an act of terrorism, welcomed his release and said Pope John Paul thanked God for the happy ending. Kasmousa told Vatican Radio he had been treated well during his one day in captivity. A Rome-based Catholic missionary news agency earlier reported the kidnappers had demanded a $200,000 ransom. Meanwhile, an Islamic group in Iraq released a video showing what it said to be 8 Chinese workers held hostage. It threatened the hostages would be killed within 48 hours unless Beijing clarified its role in Iraq. The Chinese news agency Xinhua confirmed that 8 Chinese went missing in Iraq last week. One of the kidnappers said on the video the Chinese were captured for working with one of the Chinese companies helping to rebuild American facilities in Iraq. The militants said they were from the Nu'man Brigade of the Islamic Resistance. His Majesty King Abdullah told Iraqi Minister of Planning Mahdi al-Hafiz that Iraq's reconstruction and the building of its national institutions is of paramount importance to Jordan. He said Jordan would continue rallying world support for Iraq's reconstruction and to relieve the country's debt burden. A senior Palestinian security official has said Palestinian security forces intend to disarm militant factions as part of a plan to prevent attacks on Israelis. Bashir Nafi, the commander of special forces and tipped as a possible security chief for the West Bank and Gaza, spoke a day after new President Mahmoud Abbas ordered forces to take action to stop violence to help him revive talks with Israel. After Abbas arrived in the Gaza Strip, the commander of Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade said his group would stop attacks against Israelis. A Palestinian source said Abbas aimed at ending chaos, imposing law and public order in the Palestinian territories, as well as organizing Palestinian internal affairs. He said Abbas will also discuss with chiefs of security departments changes to be made, which include integrating the security powers and forming a new government. But hours before Abbas arrived, an explosion rocked a checkpoint in the south of Gaza near the Gush Qatif settlement block. The bomber died in the explosion, but no other casualties were reported. The Izz al-Din al-Qassam Brigade, the military wing of Hamas resistance, claimed responsibility. On the other side, Ariel Sharon told military officials in the Erez border crossing between Israel and Gaza that they had the means to stop the volleys of rocket fire into Israeli towns and Jewish settlements. Sharon has given the army free rein to stop what he calls terror in the Gaza Strip before a planned pullout of Jewish settlers from the occupied territory later this year. Sharon made his visit to the Erez border crossing days after his government froze contacts with the Palestinian government, accusing it of doing little to rein in militants launching rockets from within the Gaza Strip to nearby Jewish settlements. The Israeli government says it will not resume negotiations with the Palestinian government unless real steps are taken on the ground to ensure attacks against Israel stop. Meanwhile, Israelis from the town of Sderot marched to the fenced border between Gaza and Israel. Residents of Sderot carried banners calling on Sharon to capture Gaza. Foreign Minister Hani al-Mulki called the Palestinian Authority president for a discussion of the latest escalation in the Palestinian territories. Mulki and Abbas talked about ways to restore calm and return to negotiations. The U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee began confirmation hearings of the nomination of Condoleezza Rice to become the next U.S. Secretary of State. During the hearing, Rice said she saw an opportunity in the Middle East to settle the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. She added that she plans to work personally with the Palestinians and Israelis. Rice also said that she will ask American diplomacy to be attentive to this important issue.
We have a really good opportunity here, given the election of a new Palestinian leader and given the Israeli Gaza withdrawal plan, which is linked to the West Bank through the forced settlements that would be dismantled in the West Bank as well. We think this is a moment of opportunity. That means that there is going to have to be engagement at all levels. I expect myself to spend an enormous amount of effort on this activity.
Just as the new president of the Palestinian Authority arrives to Gaza to negotiate with Palestinian resistance factions about ways to stop the military operations, the Izz ad-Din al-Qassam Brigades, Hamas's military wing, declared responsibility for carrying out the modern operation outside the military checkpoint of Matahin near Gash Qatif settlement in Gaza. While Palestinian factions were negotiating a ceasefire, Sharon announced a plan to launch a wide-scale operation in Gaza if Abbas should fail to convince the Palestinian resistance from carrying out more armed operations. While Palestinian factions were negotiating a ceasefire, Sharon announced a plan to launch a wide-scale operation in Gaza if Abbas should fail to convince the Palestinian resistance not to carry out more armed operations. Showing images of Sharon meeting with his senior generals may be intended to confirm threats directed to Abbas and Palestinian resistance factions while they were negotiating in Gaza in order to reach a comprehensive ceasefire agreement with Israel. It is clear that Sharon wants to forcibly intervene in order to foil internal negotiations, which the Palestinian Authority and Palestinian resistance are holding in order to reach a mutual agreement over fundamental political and security principles. However, Abbas's suggestion that the Palestinians put their arms down and respect the authority of law has been a source of worry among Palestinian factions. Political analysts believe that Abu Mazen, who is looking forward to go to Washington and meet with Bush, will in effect talk with him about the possibility of reaching an agreement with Palestinian factions, and Hamas in particular, for the administration of Gaza and for stopping the modern operations inside lands occupied before 1967 in return for ending Israeli aggression in all its forms. Military wings of Palestinian resistance organizations say that reaching a ceasefire agreement with Israel should not be the only objective, especially when considering the 50-day ceasefire agreement that the Palestinian factions agreed to in 2003, but wasn't respected by Israel. The Israeli government does not want a ceasefire agreement. What it wants is to eliminate the Palestinian resistance in Gaza before withdrawing from it. Abbas's job to reach a ceasefire is difficult, but it is not impossible. However, it is impossible for the Palestinian Authority to establish a central government that would enforce the law and control weapons ownership while Israel continues its aggression. Will the Palestinians be able to act as a state, though it does not exist in tangible way? And can they continue to defend themselves by armed operations? And will Abbas succeed in persuading Bush that he is the decision maker who has the complete negotiation authority? And will he be able to throw the ball in Sharon's court?
Records show an increase in poverty and unemployment in Jerusalem and the occupied territories due to the economic obstacles imposed by the Israeli occupation authorities to make the lives of Palestinian citizens in Jerusalem so difficult that they are forced to move out of the city. The policy of economic pressure and racism that the occupation forces follow against the Palestinians in the city of Jerusalem lead to a higher percentage of unemployment and poverty among the Arab society, putting 100,000 Arab families under the poverty line.
It is very clear that the Israelis have adopted plans since the beginning of 1967, right after the occupation, to pressure the people to leave the city by all means necessary. Economic pressure was one of the most important factors used by the Israelis to completely paralyze the Palestinian economy in Jerusalem since 1993.
Keeping up with this dangerous phenomenon, Arab countries requested the formation of special committees to discuss many ways to stop this trend by implementing measures to develop the Palestinian economy and increase the income of Palestinian families.
Well, I can travel and live anywhere in the world. I'm allowed to work and immigrate anywhere in the world as a Palestinian artist and calligrapher. I can find a place to live that is 1,000,000 times better than this one, but my presence here is more important than these materialistic things.
It is worth mentioning that signs of increased poverty are the product of the economic obstacles imposed by the occupation forces to hinder Palestinian business projects and reduce job opportunities, which are the key factors needed to keep a Palestinian presence in Jerusalem. This collapse of the Palestinian economy and the spread of unemployment and poverty among Palestinians in Jerusalem come in the framework of a plan by the occupation forces aiming at pressuring Palestinians to migrate from their land. Kador Shaheen, Al-Alam, Occupy Jerusalem.
Israel has warned Syria and Lebanon against further attacks by Hezbollah in the occupied Shabab Farms region after the group bombed an Israeli bulldozer, drawing Israeli strikes that wounded 2 Lebanese women. It was the second round of violence on the border in 9 days after a 6-month lull. Before the Hezbollah attack on Monday, Israeli warplanes violated Lebanese airspace and the Israeli military opened gunfire along the frontier.
Hezbollah's El Manar television station said the attack on the vehicle caused casualties and that an Israeli ambulance rushed to the scene. The Israeli army confirmed the incident in the Shabab al-Farm border area but said it caused no casualties. Israeli forces said the Air Force struck 3 suspected Hezbollah positions in southern Lebanon after the attack. A fighter bomber fired 2 missiles on a hilltop position in Alman al-Qusayr that had been occupied by Israel before its 2000 pullout from South Lebanon, wounding 2 Lebanese women. Police said an hour later a jet plotted 2 more missiles into a valley next to the western sector of the Israeli border, but caused no casualties. Israeli artillery also opened up after the Hezbollah attack, firing nearly 45 shells in 15 minutes around the villages of Kfar Shuba, Rashay al-Fakhar, Khafar Hammam and Halta, without causing any casualties. An AFP correspondent saw Israeli helicopters and other aircrafts could be seen flying over Lebanese soil at low altitude. Israel's Daily Haaretz newspaper said the Israeli military warned Syria and Lebanon that if they do not restrain Hezbollah, a more vehement Israeli reaction against them will follow. It said a surge in Hezbollah strikes was connected to Palestinian chairman Mahmoud Abbas's condemnation of attacks in the occupied Palestinian territories. A senior military source told Haaretz Israel expects Syria and the Lebanese governments to take action to stop the attacks. The source warned Damascus should be aware that Israel will respond. Earlier this month, Hezbollah killed an Israeli officer in a bomb attack on another vehicle in Shabab Farms, drawing Israeli strikes. Fire from the Israeli side killed a French officer who was working as a United Nations observer and a Hezbollah armed man. A Swedish UN worker was also wounded. The United Nations later said Hezbollah bore the principal blame for the casualties. The international community rejected Hezbollah's argument that attacks on the Shabab farms were legitimate because the district remained Israeli occupied. Lebanon and Syria say Shabab farms is Lebanese land occupied by Israel, while the United Nations describes it as an Israeli-occupied Syrian territory. Hezbollah helped end Israel's 22-year occupation of southern Lebanon in May 2000. A UN resolution last year called on Lebanon to disarm militias and deploy its army along the border with Israel.
The Daily Al-Mustaqbal said Iraqi President Ghazi Al-Yawar will visit Beirut on Thursday for talks with senior officials. The Iraqi Prime Minister Iyad Allawi had already visited the Lebanese capital. In another development, Ahmed Shalabi, the former Iraqi exile and once Pentagon confidant, accused Iraqi Defense Minister Hazem Shahlan of transferring $500 million from the Iraqi Central Bank to Beirut. Shahlan hit back, accusing Shalabi of visiting Israel 3 times since 1994 and of being a follower of Iran. The charges were part of the commotion ahead of Iraq's first post-Saddam elections. Iran said it has the military might to deter attacks against it 1 day after U.S. President George W. Bush said he would not rule out military action against Iran. His comments followed an article in the New Yorker magazine, which said U.S. commando units were conducting secret reconnaissance missions inside Iran to identify hidden nuclear and chemical sites for possible future strikes. Iran denies its nuclear facilities are to be used to make nuclear weapons, and Pentagon officials have rubbished the New Yorker report. Iranian Defense Minister Ali Shamkhani said no country has precise information about Iran's capabilities. He told the semi-official Meher news agency Tehran rapidly produced equipment that has resulted in the, quote, greatest deterrent. Bush said Washington could attack Iran.
Are you concerned about Iran's influence so much that there's a report that you have authorized the Pentagon to send commandos secretly into Iran and other countries? Is that true?
You know, they told me about that report. I haven't read it, but I think you ought to listen to what the Pentagon has said about that, and that is it wasn't true. Our policy toward Iran is to deal with them diplomatically, is to work with the world to convince them not to develop nuclear weapons, and to always speak clearly about the nature of that regime, and to remind the people inside Iran that our view is that democracy it should be the way of life for everybody, and that we stand with reformers inside Iran.
Anti-Semitism in Europe is one of the key issues at this past week's World Jewish Congress Assembly in Brussels. Top Vatican official Patrick Dubois told Jewish community leaders in attendance to be on guard because, as he sees it, Jews will always be scapegoated. IBA's Viva Press brings us this report.
It's early morning in Brussels, the so-called capital of the European Union. Most people on their way to work have no idea that the World Jewish Congress is holding its plenary assembly in the city center. A walk through the streets gives no hint of any discrimination or prejudice here. In fact, Brussels is known for its diversity and its multilingual charm. This culture-filled city is split into two, the French and Flemish communities, though there is a sizable immigrant population as well.
The people live very peacefully here together. The people has normally no problem. It's just in politics. There's a problem going on, not between the people.
While day-to-day life in Europe looks harmonious on the surface, the local Jewish communities say anti-Semitic slurs, stabbings, and even arson attacks are becoming more frequent.
One thing I can tell you, that is that the acts of anti-Semitism, of acts of anti-Semitism in Belgium are on the rise.
It's no coincidence that the WJC's assembly took place in Brussels. Belgium is second only to France of all the European nations in the number of anti-Semitic attacks on its soil. Locals say the racist incidents are not triggered by native Belgians, but rather by immigrants.
What is happening there are anti-Semitic incidents, serious incidents, more serious than we ever had them, since the beginning of the Intifada. And we know exactly where those incidents come from, why they're happening.
And you can feel it especially by Orthodox Jews. This means the last few years, when they went to synagogues on Friday night or Saturday morning, they were insulted and sometimes attacked by youngsters who are coming from Arab origin.
You have had some attacks, mostly from young Arabs, frustrated against some Jews. But I know it's more stupid than terrible, and it's certainly far lesser dramatic than in Israel or in Palestine, saying, well, which name you give to the country there.
Vatican Bishop Patrick Dubois warns that Jews have always been scapegoats and may continue to be so in the future.
Yeah, I think there has always been an anti-Semitism, and I think now we are going far from the war, and the anti-Semites feel free to speak and to act. But I think they were always here. We are not to dream. I think when the Jews are dreaming, they are in danger. Me, I don't believe in any Oslo for the diaspora.
What do you mean when the Jews are dreaming?
I think the Jews were dreaming to be well and to be accepted. Me, I think the anti-Semitism will stay until the end of the world, so we have to fight until the end of the world. When you begin to dream, you don't fight anymore, and the beginning of the nightmare.
Are you telling me that Jews forever are going to be the scapegoats and are going to be hated for until the end of time?
No, I say that they have to make allies with other people who are realistic and will fight against this. Yes, I don't think that anti-Semitic will stop one day.
It's just being picky on a minority and finding a scapegoat for whatever problems people have. If people can't get along or can't canalize their own problems, they would always be looking for somebody. Being Jew, being somebody from abroad, being somebody with another color of skin, I don't think it's particularly Jewish. Well, except that, of course, Jewish people have a long history of being persecuted, and it's so easy to pick on them.
In his speech to the convention, Edgar Bronfman, president of the WJC, which some refer to as the Parliament of Diaspora Jewry, told delegates that Congress must push European nations and others to do more to combat attacks against Jews. Thierry Vosteke, the Belgian representative to European Security Council, also said his government sees anti-Semitic violence as more than just an attack on the Jewish people.
This society has the duty to protect democracy as a system that has to protect religions, freedoms, and minorities.
Belgium cherishes the Jewish community in its midst. We acknowledge and value the contribution and this contribution to our society, and what is more, the Jewish community in our country has, I think, an important role to play in the fight against racism and also against extremism. Because after all, it's precisely because the Jewish people have endured the worst possible discrimination that I think they have developed a stronger sense than most of us of what can go wrong in our society.
Delegates at this conference say that Western European governments now understand that the rise of anti-Semitism in their countries is not just against Jews, but an attack on democracy itself. And if these governments impose legislation against these attacks, history will not be in danger of repeating itself. For IBA News, this is Viva Press in Brussels.
The views expressed on Mosaic are not those of Link TV or its sponsors, but of the broadcasters themselves. Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation and Henry and Virgilia Dakin.